Hello and welcome back. We are in the second video for this third module, ARM templates. Now we talked a little bit about Azure Resource Manager, and we briefly touched on the template capability that it offers. Now this is the video where we will start to go into the next level of detail on templates, trying to understand the basic format used within templates, what it means and how it works, and then look at a demo where we will deploy our first resource group by applying our first template that we will create together in this demo. All right. So first off, what is an Azure Resource Manager template? As I said before, the evolution from Classic, Azure Service Manager, or Azure V1 was just an XML template. Whereas now you have a JSON-based notification, which is very lightweight. So Azure Resource Manager leverages the JSON file notification, the object notification format to define the set of resources that need to be applied to provision your environment. And in the process of doing that, it takes the responsibility of managing the dependencies and guarantees that if you rerun the template again, then it's not going to just re-provision another set of those resources, but ensure that they remain in the state that was prescribed in the template as it was first created. Okay, so if we look at the Azure template core structure, it really has a few things. And this is the default structure that you kind of have to put into any template that you create. The bit that you see at the top where it says schema is the actual schema that dictates the format of the template. Now, it has the API version in it as well, and the actual schema definition is available on open source. So if you go on GitHub, for example, and I'll share the exact location of that on the next slide, you can see that the schemas are available there. The schema definitions are available there. At the same time, there are unit tests backing the schema as well. So if you just wanted to understand the implementation better, then you can do so by looking there. The schema enforces the definition. And tools that allow you to create JSON template leverage that capability to provide you IntelliSense. So Visual Studio Code, for example, I talked about a little bit earlier in the presentations, has an extension for JSON ARM templates as well. So if you install that extension, you would get full IntelliSense support to create templates. And we'll look at a bit of that when we start creating our own template for this demo. The content version bit that you see here is really just for you. It's for you to help version your own templates. If you left this value 1.0.0.0 every time you change the version of this template, then the system's not going to find any problems with that. But as a good practice, you would probably trade through the minor and the major versions as you start to introduce breaking changes or just incremental changes into the template. The section parameters is for you to specify any parameters that you expect to use as part of the resource provisioning process. Now, just to give you a feel for parameters, things like specify the VM size. It's an input that you're probably taking from the user. What is the username of the VM that gets provisioned? Again, that's a parameter. That's an input you take from the user. You can define that under the parameter section. The next section is variables. Now, variables is great because while with parameters, you can get certain information from the user, variables is for you to use that information to create reusable literals that you can start referring within your script. Now, just to give you an example, if I'm taking an input from the user on the size of the VM that they would like to provision, I could then use that to create a URI, which I can output back to the user. So I will create a variable, which is a concatenation of a couple of parameters that I've taken from the user, and then use that variable name to output the results back to the customer. And we'll get into more detail on that when we start looking at the specifics of variables. The next thing you would notice here is resources. Now, clearly, resources is not a curly braces. It's a square braces. That means it's an array, which is a good sign because you're not always going to have just one resource that you will deploy in a resource group. You'll probably have a collection of many. So things like network, storage, IP, public IP, network interface card, all of these are resources, and all of them would probably go into the resources section. Now, what you don't have to do is figure out the order that they need to go in, because Azure Resource Manager is intelligent enough to work out the dependencies and orchestrate the order by itself. And last but not the least, the output gives you an opportunity to publish the output back after the execution of this resource template. So as I promised, this is the open source repository where the Azure Resource Manager's template schemas are available. Go off, have a look at it, look at the unit tests. It's quite impressive. It's got over 130 forks, so people are trying to create separate implementations by looking at the schema that Microsoft's created here. Okay, so diving deeper into each of these aspects, the first one is the ARM template parameters. Now, let's take the example, and the template that we're going to build as part of this demo is a template that simply provisions a resource group, and within that resource group, simply provisions a storage. That's it, simple enough, right? Of course, later on, we'll look at more complex scenarios such as provisioning storage, provisioning other resources that you kind of need to get something substantial out there. But just trying to keep it simple for this demo so we can understand the concepts. So storage account type, right? You have to define the type, and this is quite important. Now, in this storage account type, the type is string. The type could be integer, the type could be Boolean, the type could be array, and so on and so forth. It's always good to specify a default value because the template is expecting a value, and if the user fails to provide a value, then it would fail. So using this keyword as you're defining your parameters is always a good practice. Allowed values I kind of encourage because, say for example, it gives the user an option to select from drop down the values that they want to select. If you don't put in allowed values, well, they can put in any string, right? They could just say la la la. Well, that's going to mean nothing in terms of storage account type. But if you narrow down the allowed values to standard LRS, GRS, ZRS, and premium LRS, well, then the user is kind of forced to select one of these. Again, it's quite easy to create, but as a best practice, really makes the error handling easier. Now, this tag, metadata, gets missed out. Rarely have I seen anyone using it. And that's because it's optional. But the reason to have it is, you're providing a description for this parameter. If you come back to this script in a few months' time, and you look at a parameter that you have created, well, looking at the description explains what the purpose of that parameter was. Again, it's a free text field that you can use to explain the parameters. But sometimes if the parameters are too straightforward or simple or too less, then it doesn't make sense including it. But I tend to include it on all the templates I create. And then, you can have more than one parameter. In this section, we have the storage account type. We also have a name parameter. Again, following the same convention, defining a type, defining a default value, and defining the metadata for it. Okay, so that's parameters. Next thing, let's look at the ARM template variables. So variables are great because you get out-of-box functions with them as well. Functions that are common, functions like concatenation, functions like unique string, right? Every time you create a template which is going to provision one resource, it's fine. But if you're creating a Azure Resource Manager template, which is going to deploy 50 instances of web apps, you're not going to code 50 separate names in your parameter file. Instead, what you will do is specify a prefix and say, Azure, figure out a unique string from this combination. And it will just postfix that with the name. So when it creates the next instance, it's got a new name. When it creates the next instance, it's got a new name. So I find this function quite useful. And I'm sure as you get going creating your own ARM templates, you're going to find the benefits that this function provides. Again, functions like split. For example, what I'm doing here is I'm taking the parameter input, which was the storage account type from the previous slide, and I'm splitting it with the literal underscore and then taking the first part of the split. That's because I want to include that as part of the storage account name parameter that I come up with. So as I said, the storage account name variable that I'm defining, I'm concatenating the prefix, the storage account, and in the end appending a -sa in it. And that kind of becomes my unique name for deploying the storage account. Next up, parameter files. Now, if you're using one too many parameters in your ARM template, chances are you're probably going to create a parameter file. If you're only pushing one parameter, you would probably pass it. But if you have a combination of 10, 15 parameters, you're not going to key each one in at the time of provisioning. So parameter files are quite useful, and I find them useful especially when you're deploying to known environments. When you're provisioning a UAT kind of environment, you have a feel for what the parameters need to be called, and you can pre-capture them in a parameter file, and then that just makes the deployment process easy. Again, if you're using CI/CD tools like Jenkins, like Visual Studio Team Services, like TeamCity, then you have a way of overriding these values on the fly as well. Next up, let's look at the ARM template resources. Now, this is the array where you can define your resources. And I'm using the provider, the namespace, Microsoft.storage/storage accounts. And the variable that we created in the previous step is the variable that we will use to identify the name for the storage account. We're specifying the API version again using the resource provider stuff that I showed you in the last demo. You can figure out what API version you want to use. And the location, we're simply going to piggyback on the location where the resource group resides within which the storage account needs to be created. Again, you don't have to put the resource group and the storage account in the same location, but it's kind of preferred. It makes more logical sense. Yeah, but again, it's not a best practice to do it. And then you can specify the SKU or the payment mode for that specific storage account, whether it's free, whether it's low subscription, medium subscription, so on and so forth. And of course, the kind is storage. Okay, and last but not the least, the ARM template output. In this case, we're just spitting out the name of the storage account that we're provisioning. Now that we're clear with all the moving parts that go together to create the template, let's actually get into a real demo and look at the template in Visual Studio Code, see the IntelliSense support we get, and have a go at deploying the first resource group using PowerShell and then deploying this template. So I'll flip right into the demo. So what I've done is I've assembled all the moving parts together that I showed you in the slide. We've got the schema, we've got the content version, we've got the parameters, the storage account type, the name that we're taking inputs from the user, the variables, the resources, and the output all in one place. Now, it's all within Visual Studio Code, and I've installed the ARM extension in there as well. The benefit of doing that, of course, is I get IntelliSense support. So for example, I can come down here and say, in the resource section, I also want to include tags. Not only do I, it gives me IntelliSense support, it does auto completion for me as well. So I can say, the tags for this is purpose, and the value is demo. And I can add another tag in here to say delete. Like I said, tags on their own have no face value, but this is metadata that you're associating with the resources you're deploying. It's just useful for you at a later stage to work out what it was for, or maybe use that as a group by clause. So I could go into the Azure portal and say, show me all the resources that are tagged as deleted, or show me all the resources that are tagged with this charge code, so I know what project they belong to. Again, simple ideas, but just real world make a lot of sense. This template has some problems in it, and it's going to fail the first time. The intent is that it fails, so I can work through with you to show you how you can identify where the problems are, then fix them. Okay, so let's go into the let's go right into the Azure ISE. What I'm going to do is I'm going to have to log into the Azure RM account once again because I've restarted my machine. So just go through the process of authenticating again. All right. Just going to blink a little bit to re-authenticate me for all the subscriptions I have access to. Next up, we're going to set the RM context to a specific subscription, which is the one where I intend to do the demo. Just waiting for it to complete. It's completed now. So, all right, that's done now. So we're kind of in the context now. We're connected to the right subscription. The next command that I'm going to run is the one which actually allows us to deploy a few things. Okay. So in order for you to deploy anything into Azure, like a storage account, you first need to have a resource group that storage account needs to go in. Deploying a resource group within Azure is quite straightforward. You would just use the command new Azure RM resource group, provide a name and a location, and that's enough usually to create a resource group. So let's just call this resource group IAC demo 01 basic ARM RG. And let's copy this and take it into the Azure portal to make sure that that I don't already have a resource group with this name. So if you click on this button here, it lists all the resource groups that are available within your subscription. Let's paste this, and we see we don't have any resource groups available with this name. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to simply run this command. I'll select it and select this button because it doesn't run the whole script. It only runs the selected part. And what it's doing, or has done, at the speed of light is deployed a new resource group within Azure. So if I come back to the portal and refresh, there we go, my resource group's provided, created, available. What I don't have here is tags, right? So if I wanted to create a resource group using tags, then what I could do is add another variable here and use the following syntax. And remember I said resource groups are idempotent. So if I run this same script again, it's saying provide a resource group already exists. Do you really want to update it? And I can click yes. And if I didn't want this prompt, I could just use the force keyword along with this, in which case it would understand that I just want to force a rerun. Now it's not deleted this resource group, but simply checked that the script still matches the state the resource group is in. And it's found that it just doesn't have the tags. And it still doesn't have the tags, so I'm clearly doing something wrong here. What I'm doing wrong is while I've defined the tags here, I haven't really passed them in the resource group creation task. So let me use the tag and then just use the parameter that I've set up here. So let's run this again. And see, this time it doesn't prompt me. It just simply goes and executes the command in the background. Now, if I go into the resource group and I click on tags, we've got the purpose demo tag in there. As I said, right, it's just the semantics of having it, but over time you're going to find it useful. Because if everything was tagged with demo, it would get listed out here. And that means if we wanted to see a slice of cost, spend, an opportunity for optimization when the bill comes for our Azure usage, then we could do it by tags as well. Okay, so stepping back from here, now that we've got a resource group, the next thing simply is to deploy the template that we've created. So, I've already got the command here, which is Azure RM resource group deployment. It's just asking what you want to call this deployment activity as. So let's just say IAC demo deployment. Now remember, the deployment name is not the same as the resource group name. The deployment name is, as you have a deployment activity, just is a way of identifying that deployment activity. When you go in the Azure portal, you can see logs, which will tell you what happened as part of that deployment workflow. And if you provide a sensible name here, well, it would just make it easier for you to identify that in the Azure portal. So we've got the template file here. What I could use or do from here is also specify some of the optional keywords, such as verbose. And in order to do that, I just need to tell it to allow me to use a new line and then just say verbose. So any output that it generates as part of deployment, it will just have verbose logging on it. So let's select this and selectively run it. Now it's bound to fail for obvious reasons, as I know, and if it passes, I'd be surprised. So see, it's got logic to constantly check the status of the deployment as well. So it's checking the status, It's saying, well, actually, it's saying that the template is valid and nothing's wrong with the template. So it's going to go off and try and deploy this. So if I go into the Azure portal Ooh, it's failed. As I said, right, it was going to fail. Now let's work through how we would identify why it's failing. So every time something fails as part of the deployment process, you get a correlation ID back from the deployment. So if I scroll down here, it says, da, da, da. Okay, I think it's not giving me a correlation ID because I'm already running this in verbose mode. If I was not running it in verbose mode, and you don't tend to run your scripts in verbose mode, then you would get a correlation ID back. And you can use this command, which is called get Azure RM log correlation ID. And basically what this lets you do with the detailed output keyword switch is that it brings back detailed logs of the reason for failure. Now, because we're running verbose, I assume that it's already bringing that back. The reason for the failure is easily highlighted here. It says, the resource failed because you have a too long name. The storage account name must be between 3 to 24 characters, and it must be lowercase. So let's come back to the script here and leverage the out-of-box functions that are available. So I'm going to just use the IntelliSense support to say to lower, put that in parentheses. And then the next thing I'm going to do is use the substring functionality to reduce the count from whatever it is down to 2 in the prefix that I'm created, which should hopefully bring down the total length to under 24 characters. So let's run this again. Probably try running this without verbose. It's going to go through the motions of revalidating the template, making an attempt to deploy it. Only if the template is valid will it actually go ahead and deploy it. But we'll soon find out. All right, so seems like it's just completed now. It's come back. So me on commenting out the verbose had no benefit because the script passed and it didn't fail, so we wouldn't know whether the correlation ID would have been returned or not. But take my word for it, it usually would give you correlation ID if you run it without verbose. Let's see what happens here. It gives me the result saying it's created the storage account. This is the name of the storage account. This is the type of the storage account. It's actually printing out the actual parameter names, the outputs as well. Because you remember in our template, we're saying, give me the output of the account, storage account name. Now, if I flip into the tab into the Azure portal, you see within this resource group, I have my storage account provisioned. If I click on the storage account, and within the storage account, I click on tags, I can see the 2 tags that I pushed through my Azure Resource Manager template. But hey, that's your storage account provision right there. And idempotent. So if I run the same script again, it will work. It will work, and it will run out. It will run very quickly because it has nothing new to provision now. It's just gonna rerun it. So benefits of Azure Resource Manager. We looked at it. We looked at, if I go back to the slides, we looked at a simple ARM template deployment with PowerShell. We went through the process of understanding its structure, the different moving parts. We assembled it into a single template. We then used the IntelliSense support within Visual Studio Code to make some amendments to it. And then using PowerShell, Azure PowerShell, we were able to create a resource group and deploy the template to provision a storage account for us with the tags. Now, this might seem quite laborious, right? You might feel, how am I going to scale my automation if every template I create is going to have so many moving parts, right? It's going to be hard. How am I going to learn this language? How am I going to start querying for all the providers that are out there and then create my library? Well, the benefit with Azure is it's got a massive ecosystem of open source alongside it. So if I take you into the Azure portal, if I take you into GitHub, and within GitHub, if we search for Azure Quick Start, then you would see that the Azure Quick Start templates, which is a repository provided by Microsoft, it's quite popular. It's got over 100 forks on it. This has got over 100 resource group templates. For every resource type that's available in Azure, there's a sample template available here. Say a name. Say, tell me something bleeding edge. Say, I don't know, So there's a template for implementing SharePoint 2013 non-high availability load. There is a template for SQL. There is a template for Azure Stack Quick Start template that allows you to deploy SQL. So if you just want to take inspiration on how you can structure your templates or look for templates that you can just pick and deploy, then this library of 100 plus templates is all you need to look at. And that's thanks to the benefit of the vibrant ecosystem around it.